Hi everyone! I do apologize that I'm getting this video posted probably later than I normally would, but I promise that in the weeks to come, I will be much more diligent about getting this up in the morning on Sunday instead of the evening, just to give you guys as much time with this material as possible. But this week we're going to focus on the middle section of Little Fires Everywhere, so chapters 9 through 13. And then we're going to talk about our project proposals, which are due on Sunday. So first, I did want to just remind you of our assignments this week. Discussion Board 5, Reading Quiz 5, both due Thursday. And again, make sure that you are not skipping these. I know that they can come up kind of quick, but I'll try and remind you guys the day before to get these started. And if you're finding it difficult to sort of keep up with the amount of reading that we do every week, I do strongly encourage everyone to break it down. Don't give yourself only Wednesday to read roughly 100 pages of a novel, especially if you want to kind of think about it and digest the story. Think of it like if you were to binge watch a show and you sit down and tell yourself, yeah, I'm going to watch this entire season of Grey's Anatomy right now. And although we all love binging our favorite shows, all of them start to blend together, right? It makes it kind of difficult to pick out the different storylines and to really dig into what's happening. So I do encourage you, don't wait until the last minute, break it down a chapter or two a day, and I promise that you'll get more out of the reading. And then finally, you've got your project proposal due Sunday, which I'll talk about in a minute. So what I wanted to discuss first is this next section of Little Fires Everywhere. So we're reading chapters 9 through 13, and I do wish that we kind of had longer with the book. I would probably section it out differently than I have for our purposes, but in this section, we kind of start with a description of Izzy and Mrs. Richardson's experience with her, kind of why their relationship is more troubled than her relationship with her other children. And it kind of has to do with Izzy being born premature and that anxiety about her survival sort of seeping into the rest of her life. So that's definitely a key piece to this section. We're also introduced to the McCulloughs in this section and their desire to adopt a Chinese baby named Mei Ling, and then also the controversy between their adopting the baby and the baby's mother wanting to reclaim her. So this is sort of a very scandalous occurrence for Shaker Heights. It's a quiet, quote unquote, idyllic community that doesn't really see a lot of high scale drama. So imagine sort of if something like this was going on in where you grew up, would reactions in your community be similar? We do learn more of Mia's past in this section about her family, her brother passing away when she was young, and the start of her experience in art school. So this is also kind of interesting to get to learn more of Mia's background. And I do want you all to think about why Mrs. Richardson is so intent on finding this information out about Mia and kind of where her anger, her frustration, her resentment comes from. Then there's some underlying storylines of teen sex in Shaker Heights, which I think is important to recognize how these sort of underlying stories of Lexi and Trip and other characters involved, and sort of how this ties into the really overall storylines between Mia and Mrs. Richardson and also the McCulloughs and their family. So that's kind of chapters 9 through 13 in a nutshell. I did pull out some questions I want you all to think about while you read this section. So the first one, I am going to butcher this pronunciation, but I believe it's pronounced noble oblige. It's a French term for the idea that those with privilege or wealth should help less fortunate. And this is sort of an ingrained tenet of life in Shaker Heights. And so I'd like you guys to ask yourself, is Mrs. Richardson living up to this idea? And are other people in Shaker Heights truly helping those that are less fortunate? How should we help those that are less fortunate? How do we deal with these ideas of privilege, particularly in wealthy communities? The next thing to think about, is it the right decision for Mia to encourage Bebe to fight for her daughter? I think that's towards the beginning of this section. We're introduced to this fight, and while we go through not only these chapters but those in the second half of the book, I think we're going to need to ask ourselves, who's right in this fight? The McCulloughs or Mei Ling's mom? What are the pros and cons of the McCulloughs adopting Mei Ling? And then on the flip side, what are the pros and cons of Bebe raising her? And I mean, these fights are, definitely happening in communities around us. And there's definitely arguments to be made for both. I mentioned Izzy's premature birth earlier, and this is kind of a idea we'll come back to in the book, but how has this kind of affected Elena's parenting and reactions to her? Is Shaker Heights really an idyllic community? There's a section of this part of the novel where Celeste Ng is sort of reflecting on how Shaker Heights reacts to social issues around the community. There's this sort of attitude that these issues, school integration, civil rights, the Vietnam War is mentioned, and how these don't necessarily reach Shaker Heights. So I'm interested to hear your all's thoughts on this idea that chaos happens outside of Shaker Heights but not within it. And how does that impact the characters in the story? And then finally, we will learn of a decision that Lexi makes in this section of the novel that's very significant and can be controversial. I don't want to kind of give away what that decision is, but you'll know what I'm talking about when you get to it. I do, encourage you all to discuss this decision in our discussion board, but I also want you to understand that this is probably deeply personal, and I don't want anyone to feel that they need to politically debate the sort of morality of the decision, but I want you to kind of reflect on how her decision is impacting her family, how it might come to impact Pearl and Mia. So lots of very interesting things to think about in this section, and I'm very excited to see what you guys have to say in our discussion board. So besides this section of Little Fires Everywhere that we're reading, we are also working on the start to our multicultural inquiry-based literary project, which is really based around the idea that I want you guys to choose an aspect of multicultural literature that you're interested in. This could be for a specific group of people, it could be for a specific time period, it could be for a specific author or a book. Any of that would be fine. But the proposal is really a plan. It's just 2 to 3 pages that include, here's what I want to look at and why. Here's my driving question, which is essentially like a research question. And then here's maybe some readings I plan to look into, the project format that I'd like to do, challenges that I can see, and then I'm also going to be looking at just the formatting of your work and if it's been edited and, polished. So I do recommend that you focus on your driving question primarily. What do you want to find out related to multicultural literature and why? There are examples of driving questions on the project description, so I would go back and read that and then also read the assignment sheet for the proposal. I did include some example projects on our week 5 folder. There's a folder with 3 different examples from students I've had previously. All of those projects received high grades, and I think show the variety that you can cover in this project. So take some time to review these materials, ideally before Sunday, and let me know if you have any questions. Please reach out if you do, and I will talk to you guys online.